economists, currently the interest rates that banks pay to borrow are higher than the interest rates that they can receive for large loans. Okay, financially strong oh, I misread that. Okay, currently the interest rates that banks pay to borrow are higher than the interest rates that they can receive for loans to large financial strong companies. Okay, banks will not currently lend to companies that are not financially strong, and total lending by banks to small and medium-sized companies is less than it was 5 years ago. So total banking lending to companies is less than it was 5 years ago. All right, so our conclusion is total banking lending to companies is less than it was 5 years ago. And our only support for that is currently, banks will not currently lend to companies that are not financially strong, and total lending by banks to small and medium-sized companies is less than it was 5 years ago. All right, currently then I have to read the first sentence again, sorry. Currently the interest rates that banks pay to borrow, are higher than the interest rates that they can receive for loans to large financially strong companies.
That sentence really, really like just made me lose everything.
Like, I feel like it's saying that the interest rates that banks are paying to borrow are actually higher than the interest rates that they can like charge financially strong companies. That makes no sense to me, but okay.
Oh, is it like there's me, there's you, there's a bank. I am no wait.
Like what? Who does the bank pay
that
to
is
borrow?
getting, like if the bank is getting a loan from a super bank, the interest rate that the super bank is charging the bank is higher than what the bank is
So
charging
essentially,
to
whenever
me.
banks loan to financially strong companies right now, they're losing money.
Oof.
Which that like goes against like, I'm like, how is that a thing? But okay. So currently all right. So, but our conclusion is total bank lending to companies is less than it was 5 years ago overall. So we're not just talking about, in our premise, we say that banks are not lending to companies or to small and medium-sized companies. But now we're saying that bank lending to companies is less than it was 5 years ago, like overall banking. All right, so we have to get, what kind of question is this, Brittany?
It is a sufficient.
Yeah, sufficient assumption. So we have to guarantee our conclusion. And so we know already that the last than 5 years, or in the last 5 years, small to medium companies is less. So what would guarantee this conclusion? What do we need to guarantee that total banking to these companies is less than it was 5 years ago?
Is it that the large, like the strong and large companies
Yes.
are not getting their loans?
Yeah, because if we say that the large financial strong companies are down in the last 5 years too, wouldn't that guarantee our conclusion? If we know the small and medium sized are already down?
Yeah. I see it. I see it now.
All right, so let's start with A. Banks will not lend money at interest rates that are lower than the interest rates that they pay to borrow.
Isn't that what's happening?
Well, we know that we know it is what's happening, but we don't know that the banks aren't lending to them. So it is A, Alyssa, because it's telling us at the beginning that currently the interest rates that banks pay are higher than what they get. And if we can just add in that they don't lend to those people, then we're golden.
So Nicole, I made the connection, like, so when I read this, like I made the connection about like, okay, well, it tells you about small and medium size, but what about the large one? So I made that connection, but like, I don't know how like we go from that to like A.
Okay, perfect. Great question. I feel like that's like, yeah. So currently This is what's happening. Interest rates that banks pay to borrow are higher than the interest rates that they receive for loans to large companies. So what this is saying is that if a bank gave out a loan to a large company, they would have a lower interest rate to pay it back than what the bank has to borrow. Does that make sense? Do we all catch that? And so what A is saying is that banks won't lend money at a rate that is lower than the interest rates that they pay to borrow. So essentially what they're saying is they're not going to do this. And who is this for? The large banks, the large companies.
So does that prove that lending? So because we already know that small and medium size is down, and
Yeah.
then given this the stuff in the blue, if we know this, then we know that. Or sorry, if we know A, then we know that the large is also down, right?
Yes, because what the blue is true for is for large financially strong companies. Like for large financially strong companies right now, how much it would cost for me to borrow money is more expensive than what I would charge you in interest. So why a bank wouldn't want to do that, right?
Yeah.
And A is just telling us that they're actually not going to do that.
So like they're not doing anything with the large. That means all three of them are down. And
Yes,
then in
which would
general,
guarantee our conclusion.
I see.
So I think what I'm struggling with is like, how do we know that this was less than it was 5 years ago for the large?
Because it told us that
Where? I think that's why I didn't pick A when I went through this as a timed.
so the banking lending to companies is so total bank lending to companies.
Yeah, that's true. Like that's actually a good point because like it doesn't talk about like the past 5 years. It's saying like currently right now, like the large one is like that, right? Like
Is
how do
it is it because okay, total lending total to all companies is less than it was 5 years ago. And so like if large is not happening
It has
and
to at least
small and medium sizes are going down, wouldn't
okay,
large
so,
lending go down?
so if large, yeah, okay, great question. So if large is not happening, even if large was 0 5 years ago, if small and medium both went down,
Right,
everything would go down.
right. And even if large wasn't like if large was stable, medium and small are still going down, so it would still go down.
Yeah, because even if it was a huge number, like 100, like
Mhm.
large isn't happening at all, so that's going down.
Okay, yeah, that makes. I don't like that, but it makes sense.
Do you catch that, Mohib?
no, like that makes sense now, I guess.
It's like, yeah, because okay, so we have three numbers, right? We have and small, medium, and small are both going down no matter what. Large isn't happening at all. So it doesn't, so if large was just 0, like even if before 5 years ago, large wasn't happening at all, the whole thing would go down because like the other two are going down. So it's for sure lower. But if this was like even any kind of number, nothing is going to be lower than that number. Brittany, are you good?
Yeah, I'm just processing. Yeah, I think I'm okay.
Okay, what answers here were we debating?
I picked E, but I think it was because I did not understand the stimulus. Like
D,
economic stuff.
the interest
me.
rates that banks currently pay to borrow are higher than the rates they paid 5 years ago. Yeah, we don't know that. We don't know what their rates were 5 years ago.
I chose B, but like I don't know.
So most small and medium-sized companies were financially stronger 5 years ago than they are now.
Like that's true, right? But it's not like sufficient.
I don't think
I
it's
said
true. What?
I said the same thing but when I was reviewing, I thought like it could be true, but it doesn't have to be true in order for the conclusion to
Oh,
be true.
that's a necessary assumption. So sorry, this is sufficient assumption. So would this guarantee our conclusion? No, because what if people were because like what if people were still loaning out to these large companies?
Yeah. Let's see.
They all could be there. And then C says 5 years ago, at least one bank would lend to companies that were not financially strong. Okay, cool. That doesn't guarantee our conclusion. That would actually go in the opposite direction of what we need, anyways. And then E, the interest rates that small and medium sized companies pay to borrow are higher than those paid by, like, no, because once again, they're buying into this idea that we're assuming that the higher the interest rate, the less likely the bank is to loan. And we can't assume that. We don't know what will happen.
Wait, sorry, could you repeat that?
I think a lot of these answer choices are buying into this idea, like wanting us to assume that we think like, oh, if the interest rate's higher, then like people didn't loan before, now they aren't going to loan because they don't want to do high interest rates. But we actually don't get to assume that. We have no idea what the bank's going to do based on the interest rates.
Mhm.
And so I think a lot of those like kind of buy into us assuming that.
Mhm.
All right, cool. And that's why it's A. How do you feel, Kamani?